Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to look at every single caliber from 17 all the way up to 458. We're going to find out which one is the top dog in speed. Hope you enjoy the video. Before I start naming off cartridges, let's look at the criteria. Number one, it needs to be a SAMI spec cartridge or the European equivalent. Number two, it's offered in a factory rifle. And number three, there's actual factory ammo for this cartridge. Now, I'm going to do my best to follow this criteria. However, I'm a human being and make mistakes. So if I miss a cartridge that you think should be on this list, please let me know below. Let's start with the 17 caliber. And you know what? There's more cartridges in 17 caliber than I thought. Quite a bit more than in 20 caliber. You have the 17 HMR, which is really popular from Hornady. You also have the 17 WSM. And the fastest, number one, is the 17 Hornet. Hornady does still make 17 Hornet ammo. And you're pushing a 25 grain bullet at 3,600 feet per second. It is far and away the fastest by quite a bit. It beats the 17 HMR by about 700 feet per second. Let's move on to the 20 caliber. And in the 20 caliber, there is only one, and it's a darn good one. It is the 204 Ruger. The 204 Ruger's parent case is the 222 Remington Magnum, which think of it like a 223, but just a little bit longer and a little bit more powder capacity. You're shooting 32 grain bullets over 4,000 feet per second. This cartridge, quite the varmint cartridge, out to about 300 yards. We are moving on to 22 caliber. For a long time, the 220 Swift was the speed demon from Winchester, shooting a 34 grain bullet at 4,400 feet per second. Other books have it at 4,500 feet per second. However, in the recent years, the 22 Creedmoor was introduced. It just might dethrone the 220 Swift. Now, I don't have 22 Creedmoor water capacity, but we do have 6mm Creedmoor. So this one holds 46.3 grains of water. Let's go to the 6mm Creedmoor. And it has 49.1. So I do believe the new speed demon in 22 caliber is the 22 Creedmoor. Onto the 6mm cartridges. 6mm is a new hot thing right now. But the speed demon of 6mm actually isn't the 240 Weatherby. It is the influence of the 240 Weatherby. Roy was inspired by the 244 H&H. So the 244 H&H is the fastest, most powerful 6mm cartridge. Also a pretty dead cartridge. I'm not sure anyone in America even has one. And if you Brits have it, please let me know if people still use it. Let's get to the very underrated 25 caliber. And number one for Speed Demon, and has been since the 40s, the 257 Weatherby Magnum. Now there is a Wildcat cartridges, and you could say this for all of the calibers we're going to be talking about. There is the 257 Shooting Times Westerner, but that is a Wildcat cartridge. So in factory form, this is the fastest. In my hand loads, I'm shooting this 110 grain AccuBond at 3,500 feet per second. I definitely could get it faster. I just love the accuracy I'm getting with this 110 AccuBond at 3,500. For anyone that isn't new to my channel, you know that I have pushed the 257 Weatherby pretty hard. I've been able to push a 101 grain Barnes LRX at over 3,800 feet per second. I haven't really played around with a bullet that's lighter than 92 grains. Achieving 4,000 plus feet per second is definitely obtainable with smaller bullets. On to the 6.5mm. Weatherby, again, is the top dog in velocity. The 2016 Weatherby introduced the 6.5-300 Weatherby. And the 6.5-300 is exactly what it sounds like. It is a 300 Weatherby neck down to 6.5 millimeter, which gives you insane velocities, extremely overbore, very short barrel life. It seems like a really fun cartridge. I've heard hand loaders being able to get up to 3,500 feet per second with a 140 grain bullet. Put that in perspective, the 6.5 Creedmoor shoots 140 grain around 2,700 feet per second. The 6.5-300 is the flattest shooting cartridge in the world. Let's go on to the 270 caliber. Now, for a while, the 270 Weatherby was the top dog, but of recently, in the last 4 years, Nosler introduced their 27 Nosler. And this happened in 2020, so I don't think anyone really recognized 27 Nosler actually exists. Sadly, I think it's already a dead cartridge, even though it's 4 years old. 27 Nosler is simply basically a 28 Nosler neck down to 270. And it is an absolute speed demon. You're looking at almost 3,600 feet per second with a 130 grain. Where this thing really excels, I think, is 150 and 165 grain bullets, because it does have a faster twist. 150 at 3,400. With the 165 grain ABLR, you're looking at almost mid 3,200 feet per second. This thing is a darn good performer that no one really cares about. In the year 2000, Remington introduced the most powerful 7mm cartridge there is. A 7mm Remington Ultra Magnum. Parent case is the 300 Remington Ultra Magnum. The 7-Rum, it's not a very popular cartridge, and it's extremely overbore. You probably should get better velocities than you do, but it is still the king of speed for 7mm. I don't think the books really do it justice either. And you're looking at a 168 at 3,100. That's nothing really to write home about. A 175 grain at 3,158. Wait, doesn't 28 Nosler get faster? Yeah, here's the thing with reloading books. They're not the Bible. Your velocities will definitely vary, and what I've noticed is you should be able to get quite a bit more than what the books say, especially with these speed demons. So anyone out there with a 7-Rum, I've heard that you can get 3,300 feet per second with a 175 grain, which sounds a bit more accurate because that's kind of what the 300 Rum is doing with a 180 grain. It is an absolute speed demon. Now we are on to 30 caliber. There are a lot of 30 calibers and there's a lot of fast ones. But what sits at the top of velocity is another Weatherby. This one is the 30-378 Weatherby Magnum. Parent case is the 378 Weatherby. This case is ridiculously huge. Has about 120 grain case capacity, and you're pushing like a 180 grain bullet, 3,400. I've had hand loaders tell me they can easily push it over 3,500 feet per second. And like the 7-Rum, this would best be suited for a longer barrel that's not really meant for a hunting rifle. I've seen channels that have over 30-inch barrels where they're shooting a 250 grain bullet out of a 30-378 Weatherby, 3,150 feet per second. That's insane performance. Looking at the 8mm, there's really one that sticks out that is much faster than all the rest. It's the 8mm Remington Magnum. The 8mm Remington Magnum, well, it's based off the 375 H&H. It is a Magnum length action, and what it really resembles most is it's very close to 300 Weatherby performance. Americans just have never caught on or have liked 8mm, so this cartridge is very, well, just about dead. But it is a darn good performer. A 180 grain at 3,286 feet per second, a 200 grain at mid 3,000 feet per second. The top velocity king in 338, at least in factory form. Yes, there are a ton of Wildcats that would beat this, but in 338, it's the 338-378 Weatherby Magnum. And as you can imagine, it is a 378 Weatherby neck down to 338. So it's the same case as a 30-378 Weatherby. This is the 30-378 Weatherby next to a 340 Weatherby, so you can see the size difference. But you are pushing big bullets extremely fast. This does beat a 338 Lapua. It's about 100 feet per second faster than a 338 Lapua. There's not a lot of people that have this cartridge, and I wish there were more. I wish there were people that have this cartridge that would feature it more on YouTube, just so you can see the true potential of it. I've got to imagine you can shoot a 225 grain bullet at 32, probably 3,300 feet per second, and a 250 grain easily 3,100 feet per second. This thing is an absolute monster. We're on to the 358 caliber, and this one's a really cool one. The 358 Shooting Times Alaskan, who was created by Lane Simpson in the early 90s. The parent case to the 358 STA is the 8mm Remington Magnum that we just looked at, and it gets you some darn good performance. A 225 grain at nearly 3,100 feet per second, a 250 grain 2,900. I imagine you could get more, but quite the performer. Lane loves this cartridge for Alaska, hence why he named it Alaskan. This is a SAAMI spec cartridge. Now let's not forget about our European friends. Let's talk about the 9.3 millimeters. I believe the fastest 9.3 millimeter is a 9.3 by 64 Brennecke. Now, any Europeans, correct me if I'm wrong if there is a more powerful one, but the 9.3 by 64 Brennecke is an impressive cartridge. It is a very efficient cartridge. About a month ago, I did a full-length video on it. Go check it out if you're more interested in it. But I also believe it is maybe the first rebated rim cartridge. It came out in the 20s, and it's a very impressive performer. We're on to the 375 caliber, and easily the most recognizable 375 caliber is the 375 H&H. It is a legend of a cartridge. It has pretty darn good performance. It is the grandpa of most belted Magnum cartridges, and you're shooting a 300 grain bullet at 2,500 feet per second. It's pretty darn good performance. But as you can imagine, it is not the fastest 375. That goes to the 378 Weatherby Magnum. A 270 grain at 3,100 feet per second and a 300 grain at 2,900 feet per second. That's insane. That's 400 feet per second faster than the 375. Now, the guys at Weatherby have talked about how this thing kicks like a mule, and I can imagine it is not enjoyable to shoot. The 416 caliber has some really good ones. For example, probably the most well-known is the 416 Remington Magnum, but the 416 Weatherby beats it by a good amount. And I'm sure you can imagine it's also a thumper as well. Now, according to Hornady, this is the most powerful of the 416 calibers in the hunting cartridge arena. So this is where I might be wrong in calling the 416 Weatherby the most powerful 416. The next page over, you get the 416 Barrett. I'm not sure I could find the 416 Barrett on SAAMI's website. I'm not 100% sure if it's a SAAMI approved cartridge, but either or, you either have the 416 Weatherby or the 416 Barrett is the most powerful. The 416 Weatherby is shooting a 400 grain bullet at 2,700 feet per second. And we move on to 416 Barrett, which is really just a shortened 50 BMG neck down to 416, a 450 grain at 3,050 feet per second. Let's talk 458 calibers. And of course, the most powerful is the 460 Weatherby. And as Hornady says, at its inception, the 460 Weatherby earned the title of the world's most powerful commercial cartridge. So it develops 8,000 foot-pounds of energy. This thing is insane. A 350 grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second and a 500 grain bullet at 2,550, which narrowly edges out the 450 Rigby that shoots it at 2,500. This thing is an absolute powerhouse, and for some time it was the most powerful commercial cartridge you could get. Let's take a glance at all the calibers and the fastest. Again, if I made a mistake, let me know if I missed one. But there were 16 calibers I went over. No surprise, the company that has the most on this list is the Weatherbys. They comprise 7 of the 8. You also had Remington that had 2 of the 16, the 8 Rem mag and the 7mm Rum. Nosler had 1. Hornady and Ruger, they had at least 1, unless you want to count the 22 Creedmoor, which is technically made by Horizon. Thanks guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you next time.